When I think of Amy Santiago, I think of colour-coded binders and scheduled fun. She might be the most organised character in sitcom history, and for the longest time I thought there's no way I can relate to that. But it turns out Amy is such a wonderfully deep, complex and important character, and after really reflecting on her, I am fascinated by this character. If you ask most people to describe Amy, they'll probably use the same few words. Perfectionist, teacher's pet, overachiever, or something like that. And they're all wrong. Well, they're not wrong, but they're not the full truth either. Because underneath the meticulousness, there's a much deeper psychological question driving Amy's character. A question that I don't think even Amy herself fully understands. How do I know I'm enough? And once you start looking at Amy through that lens, almost everything about her suddenly begins to make sense. Her obsession with rules, her competitiveness, her need for approval, her fear of failure, even her relationship with Jake. Because despite being one of the most competent detectives in the 9-9, a woman who defies stereotypes and achieves greatness relentlessly, Amy almost never behaves like someone who is secure. Think about it. A case becomes another opportunity to demonstrate her intelligence. A promotion becomes proof that she's moving in the right direction. A compliment from Captain Holt carries enormous and almost detrimental emotional weight. Not because Amy is arrogant, and this is what casual viewers might get wrong about her. It's actually the opposite, because somewhere underneath all that competence, I think she's terrified that if she ever stops achieving, people might realise something. What that something is, we don't know. Whatever it is she is afraid of is an illusion. It's a shadow that follows her and clings to her, and like a shadow, it is vanquished not by running, but by shining a light on it. Sorry, I enjoy coming up with metaphors, but what we're really talking about here is a strange contradiction. She's intelligent, hard-working, kind, professional, she solves impossible cases, and eventually she becomes a captain. Objectively speaking, Amy has very little left to prove. So why does she keep trying? Why isn't success ever enough? Because I don't think Amy is actually chasing success. I think she's chasing certainty, or perhaps more accurately, proof. Proof that she's intelligent enough, proof that she's competent enough, and that she is worthy of respect. She needs feedback that she's making the right decisions, and she needs to know that she's becoming the person she thinks she's supposed to be. And that's what makes Amy such a fascinating character psychologically. Most sitcoms treat the organised person as a joke. They're funny because they're uptight. Brooklyn Nine-Nine certainly does that too, but the difference is, organisation isn't Amy's personality. It's more like her coping mechanism. She organises the world not out of enjoyment, but because disorder makes her anxious. Every checklist reduces uncertainty. Every carefully constructed plan protects her from the terrifying possibility that she might make a mistake. And mistakes matter to Amy far more than they do to almost anyone else in the series. If your entire life is built around being the competent one, what happens when you're incompetent? If your value comes from achievement, what happens when you fail? Those questions haunt Amy throughout the series. Now, before we go any further, I should say something. And this isn't a clinical diagnosis, but Amy clearly has obsessive tendencies, and plenty of viewers have suggested she displays traits associated with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Whether that's true or not isn't really what interests me, because labels only tell us what someone is. Psychology asks, why? Why does Holt's approval mean so much? Why does she compete with absolutely everybody? Why does she panic whenever life refuses to follow the plan? Why does someone who spends her entire life trying to eliminate uncertainty eventually fall hopelessly in love with the most unpredictable man in New York? Today, I want to explore the mind and character of Amy Santiago. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make when analysing Amy is assuming she's motivated by perfection. I don't think she is. Perfection is just the strategy. The real goal is proof, as we said before. She needs the feedback. She needs the evidence. Once you start looking for that pattern, it appears everywhere. She always seems to be becoming something, whether that's a better detective, sergeant, or captain. Even her hobbies often become opportunities for self-improvement. It's as though Amy believes identity isn't something you possess, but something you maintain. And that's exhausting, because if your worth depends on constant achievement, achievement can never really end. There'll always be another promotion, another qualification, another person who's more successful. And I think that's exactly why Amy's perfectionism never satisfies her. She's trying to solve an emotional problem with professional success, which almost never works. And worse, her perfectionism sometimes leads to error in of itself, one striking example being her overbrushing leading to 7 cavities. One of my favourite details about Amy is how often she asks questions, not because she lacks intelligence, quite the opposite. Amy hates uncertainty. If there are instructions, she wants them. If there are rules, she'll memorize them. If there are expectations, she wants to know every single one. The other characters almost never ask those kind of questions. Take Jake. He assumes he'll figure things out. Amy wants to know before she even begins, and that's a completely different relationship with the world. Jake treats uncertainty like an adventure. Amy treats it like a risk. She prepares obsessively. Binders, backup binders, emergency binders, schedules, timetables, flowcharts, detailed plans for situations that almost certainly won't happen. The joke is that Amy loves organization, but I don't think that is a joke. I think organization is the manifestation of Amy's anxiety. Organization is how Amy creates the comforting illusion that life can be controlled. Of course, this is common in OCD. As I said before, whether Amy has OCD or not is of mild importance to me, but I still think it's worth discussing. OCD can be caused by a combination of factors, including genetics, brain structure, trauma, stress. I think a case could be made for all of these as factors in Amy's life. Her parents arguably display similar traits, which would explain the genetic components, and as a cop, she's likely dealt with a fair share of trauma and stress. What's more, her OCD traits seem to be exacerbated by moments of high stress. Have you noticed how often Amy catastrophizes relatively small failures? Someone else forgets an appointment, they laugh it off. Amy forgets something, and suddenly she's questioning her competence, her professionalism, sometimes even her identity. Now on the surface this looks like perfectionism, as we've already identified, but I think something even deeper is happening. Amy is afraid of mistakes because mistakes create doubt. Amy rarely interprets failure as an isolated event, she interprets it as evidence that she is collecting about herself. That's why even tiny setbacks can feel enormous. And I think this explains something else about Amy as well, why praise affects her so deeply. Captain Holt compliments everybody, but Amy hears those compliments differently, because Holt isn't simply complimenting her, he's confirming her identity. Imagine asking Amy, how do you know you're successful? She'd probably produce a list. Promotions, commendations, solved cases, professional achievements, that kind of thing, right? Now imagine asking, how do you know you're enough? That's a much harder question because there isn't a checklist, no test results, and no scoreboard. And this question is the one I think she has been asking herself all her life. So where does this need for proof actually come from? Well, Brooklyn Nine-Nine gives us a few important clues. Amy grew up with 7 brothers. For her, every Thanksgiving became a competition. Every conversation somehow turned into a contest. The siblings kept score over everything. Who won the most games, who got the best grades, who's the favourite, who's more successful. And when we meet Amy's brother David in Season 6, Episode 9, a lot of these abstract assumptions are fully rendered. Children often learn who they are through comparison. You can even see this reflected in our education system. Long before they understand careers, relationships, or success, they're constantly asking one question: where do I fit? And in a family as competitive as the Santiagos, I imagine that question became impossible to avoid. The show never suggests Amy had a bad childhood. Her parents clearly loved their children, but love isn't always interpreted the way it's intended, especially by ambitious children. Imagine being the youngest daughter in a family of 8 high-achieving siblings. Here, every report card is compared, and more importantly, every mistake is remembered. And as evidenced by the episode I mentioned with David, family gatherings become another opportunity to prove yourself. For Amy, achievement stopped being something you do a long time ago, and it became something you are. I got an A or I got an F becomes I am an A or I am an F. Most people assume Amy enjoys winning. I'm not convinced she does. Winning simply allows her to relax for a few moments. Debates, trivia, games, even tiny disagreements somehow become opportunities to establish who's correct. It's funny because the stakes are usually microscopic. I don't think the stakes feel microscopic to Amy. Every victory reinforces the identity she spent her entire life constructing, which is competent, prepared, successful, and worthy. But as far as Amy is concerned, no matter what you've accomplished, the finish line keeps moving. The promotion only feels exciting for about a week. Then there's another promotion, another qualification, another goal, because external success can never permanently answer an internal question. In my own life, I've known people who feel they have to move house or neighbourhoods because they believe that their problems will be solved if they can get out of their environment. And sometimes they'll keep moving forever because they take the problems with them. This is a core concept of my fiction book, Fresh Start 40. Anyway, it's the same thing with Amy, but instead of location, it's achievement. And this is where I think Amy differs from someone like Gina. Gina decides she's extraordinary first, and expects the world to agree, as we said in the last video. Amy waits for the world to tell her she's extraordinary before she'll believe it herself. Both care deeply about how they're perceived, but they solve that insecurity in opposite ways. Television has often struggled with highly intelligent women. They're either portrayed as cold or socially awkward, or eventually they're forced to abandon their ambition in order to become more likable. Amy does none of those things. She is a woman who is deeply ambitious, kind, and competent, and crucially, those qualities never compete with one another. In fact, I'd say they strengthen each other. She proves that kindness isn't weakness, that organization isn't boring, that intelligence doesn't make someone emotionally distant. She can arrest dangerous criminals, cry over a disappointing test score, win a debate, panic over a mistake, make terrible puns, and still feel completely believable. Because real people contain contradictions. Amy isn't one thing, she's many things at once, and I guess that's what makes her feel human. The reason Santiago has become one of the most beloved sitcom characters isn't because she's funny, which she is, and it's not because she's intelligent, it's because Amy represents a very modern kind of anxiety, the feeling that your worth is always being evaluated. Think about the world we live in. School teaches us that every answer has a grade, and work gives us performance reviews. Social media gives us followers. For some, our watches measure our sleep, our phones count our steps, our lives become numbers. Always measuring, always improving, always comparing. And somewhere along the way, many of us start believing that we are those numbers, that our value can somehow be calculated. Amy understands that world instinctively. She constantly measures herself against an invisible standard. In so many ways, she is of her era. She captures the zeitgeist of a generation. Perhaps my favourite thing about Amy is that despite all of her achievements, she never loses her kindness. Competence often becomes arrogance. Success becomes ego. Amy never really lets that happen. She wants to win, but despite her competitiveness, she also wants everyone else to succeed. It's a contradiction, but it's a beautiful one. She pushes Jake to become better. She supports Rosa. She encourages Terry. She celebrates Holt and even Gina, despite years of relentless teasing. Amy doesn't climb over people, and that's why we love her. Some of you are going to wonder why I'm talking about Jake in the Amy video, but didn't talk about Amy in the Jake video. The truth is I could have talked about their relationship in either. I left it for this video because I didn't think I'd have as much to say about Amy as I did Jake. In hindsight, I have plenty to talk about when it comes to Amy, but it is what it is. If Amy Santiago is order, Jake is chaos. He arrives late, he ignores procedure, he improvises, he leaves paperwork unfinished, he turns serious situations into jokes, and somehow he keeps succeeding. To Amy, this should be impossible, because Jake breaks almost every rule she's built her life around. Amy believes success comes from preparation. Jake believes it comes from adaptation. Amy studies, Jake improvises. Amy plans, Jake reacts. Amy wants certainty before she begins, Jake figures things out along the way. They're not simply different personalities, they're opposing philosophies, and that's what makes their relationship so fascinating to me, because in season 1, Amy doesn't just dislike his behaviour, she dislikes what he represents. Think about how often Amy gets frustrated with Jake during the early seasons. On the surface she's annoyed by his immaturity, but I think something deeper is happening. Jake creates a problem Amy can't solve. He's competent. Very competent. In fact, you could argue that he's the best detective in the precinct, depending on your metric. But he achieves that competence in completely the wrong way, at least according to Amy's understanding of the world. Jake succeeds despite being disorganized, despite being impulsive and breaking rules, and doing everything Amy believes people shouldn't do. He's living proof that her formula isn't the only formula. And that's deeply uncomfortable, because if Jake can succeed without constant preparation, then maybe preparation isn't the entire answer. I think Amy's attraction to Jake begins long before she realizes it, and vice versa. Jake possesses something she secretly envies, freedom, and Amy possesses something he secretly envies, structure. And the freedom Jake represents is not freedom from responsibility, it's freedom from self-judgment. Jake makes mistakes constantly and then moves on. Amy makes one mistake and remembers it for years. Jake doesn't seem trapped by the same internal pressure, and I think Amy finds that incredibly attractive. Not consciously, at least at first. Jake embodies a version of life she doesn't know how to access. A life where uncertainty isn't terrifying. A life where your value isn't constantly being evaluated. There's a strange irony at the centre of their relationship. Each possesses the quality the other lacks. Jake needs structure, Amy needs flexibility. Jake needs responsibility, and Amy needs freedom. Neither character realises this immediately, but together they begin slowly correcting each other's weaknesses. That's why their relationship feels so healthy. Neither person completely changes. They soften. They are enriched by each other. One of the things I love about Jake and Amy is that neither one wins. In lesser sitcoms, one worldview would triumph, but Brooklyn Nine-Nine does something smarter. The goal is balance. Balance is exactly what Amy has been missing. Because here's the problem with Amy's worldview. If your worth depends on competence, life becomes terrifying. There will always be situations you can't prepare for. There will always be uncertainty and failure in life, and no amount of planning can eliminate that. Jake understands this, perhaps because his childhood forced him to. He grew up with disappointment, with uncertainty, with a father who wasn't there, and he was alone in many ways. His entire personality developed around adaptation. You can almost imagine young Jake learning things won't go according to plan anyway. So he learns flexibility instead. Amy learns the opposite lesson. She learns to prepare harder, to work harder, to prove herself harder. And that's why they're drawn to each other. Each sees an alternative future. What's especially interesting is that Jake never seems particularly impressed by Amy's achievements. Now, obviously he respects them, but that's not why he loves her. Jake loves Amy, not Amy's achievements. And it's partly because of that she starts to be able to differentiate between the two. And I think that matters a lot. And in my opinion, Jake teaches Amy something nobody else in the series can, not even Holt. Jake teaches her that love isn't a performance review. It isn't a competition. Maybe love isn't something you earn. Maybe love is something you receive. There's a reason some of Amy's biggest moments of growth happen inside her relationship with Jake. Relationships are uncertain. Marriage is uncertain. Parenthood is chaos. No binder can prepare you for every outcome. Eventually, Amy reaches a point where she has to trust herself, and that's a huge step, because for most of the series, Amy trusts evidence more than instinct. Jake slowly teaches her to trust both, and for the record, Amy's impact on Jake is equally important, and helps him to transform in an equally healthy way. They're the antidote to each other. They heal each other. Amy believes she must constantly prove her value, Jake believes he has little value to prove. Amy fears uncertainty, Jake accepts it, and I could go on and on like this. As usual, thanks for watching. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for being a part of this community. I do try to reply to as many comments as I can. If you've not seen it yet, I made my first video on young Sheldon last week. There are more sitcom analyses on the way. A thumbs up really helps out if you like the video. Subscribe if you're interested in more content like this, and of course, hit the notification bell so you know when I drop my videos. Follow on Instagram for updates, and I want to give a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters: Carbon Atom, Star Laura, Keenan Smith, Greg Whitworth, Casey, Beverly, Daniel, and Carlos Diaz. Have a great week and see you in the next one.